Hello, you're listening to the Man Them Ghostwriter podcast on 1020 Radio. I hope you're having a good day. I'm very excited to be joined by a special guest today and a very good friend of mine. Teo Lewin-Turner is a third-year history student at the University of Bristol. He's worked with Bristol Museums, Brighton Museums, Historic England and DCMS, and his research interests include collective memory, race and identity, social movements, and modern marronage. How are you doing today, bud?
I'm good.
Was that a good intro?
That was. Where did you get that from?
I found
Being on my LinkedIn.
I found it online. I googled your name,
Oh, cool.
and it came up on. It might have been on one of the museum's websites, I think.
Cool.
But yeah, so I've known Teo for a while now. You came to Bristol in 2017.
2017, yeah, I think so.
To study history at UWE.
Yes.
And then yeah, we met. You came on board, was supportive of everything I was doing with Mandem and all of that. Wrote a few cool articles, and yeah, here we are. Yeah, a couple years later.
Yeah. 3 years down the line.
The dreadlocks are gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to talk to you about your passion for history. As you know, obviously I've just finished my MA in history and your third year in history. We've got a lot of similar interests, and yeah, you do a lot of amazing stuff in the city. And yeah, you coming to Bristol was amazing for me as well, just because it was nice to have a like-minded person in the same city.
Well, no,
as well.
having you here was a big thing for me. First person to ever think anything I wrote was worth putting online. So no, I appreciate that.
We usually have a bit of a circle jerk at the beginning of these podcasts. But yeah, yeah, man. So you're from Brighton.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were just talking briefly about that's a ground zero for coronavirus.
Yeah. I'm meant to be going back.
But
next
you're
week.
safe, yeah.
I'll be fine. Apart
Yeah.
from
Please don't.
My asthma and every other ailment I have. But yeah, originally from Brighton. Left when I was 17. Moved out to play basketball up north. Relatively unsuccessful stint of can't really call it a career, but yeah, played basketball until I was 19. Ended up when I was 17, I dropped out of A levels, and then did a BTEC in sport while I was playing for Myerscough Basketball Academy.
Where was that?
That was Preston.
Oh, okay,
Preston, wow. Yeah. Not my of all the places I lived, wasn't my favourite, I think, to say the least. But yeah, I lived in Preston for 2 years, and then went to University of East London to play basketball and to study sports science. And then, I'm sure we'll get into it, but found history along the way.
Had your racial awakening.
Had my awakening, yeah. And then from London, it was really kind of established grounding myself in historiography, literature, stuff that I'd never done before, never studied history before. Found my way to UWE, got rejected by SOAS in Sussex, which I'm not salty about at all. I'm actually working with SOAS at the moment, so that makes up for it. But yeah, found my way to UWE, was so enthusiastic about working with this amazing historian, Dr. Madge Dresser, and then got there, found out she had retired. So after about half of one of the terms, I was like, I need to get out of here. Found out through my connections with Bristol Museums that Bristol University had an amazing curriculum, which kind of seriously engaged with race and kind of black history more broadly. And then found my way there, luckily got in, transferred into the second year, mainly through kind of the strength of my writing and my work with Bristol Museum and Brighton Museum. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got here. And now I've nearly finished that degree, hoping to go on to some more postgraduate stuff. So
you moved to the dark side.
Yeah, to the,
to the
Russell group.
Yeah.
Very white, elitist. But yeah, I've had an interesting experience, though. Definitely juxtaposing it with UWE was interesting. But really, wherever you go, history is Hakeem Addy's new book on Black British history. In the introduction, he talks about how history is the third least popular degree for Black British people. The only degrees that are less popular are veterinary nursing and horticulture, or something like that. And it's so wherever you go in the UK, maybe save for SOAS, history is a pretty white degree. You don't find much, diversity in those seminars and those lecture theatres. So that has been constant wherever I've been. However, in terms of when you're at UE, 25% of the student population is BME, that awful word. But when you're at UOB, it's not really the same. So it's definitely been, in terms of friendship groups and extracurriculars, that has changed significantly, and I've had to kind of rejig my expectations of myself as the other in that context.
And why do you think that history is so unpopular as a subject amongst black students?
Well, this is something I'm kind of theorising at the moment. I'm doing a project with BBC about this. I think there's three main factors. The first is how awful and how Eurocentric and just white-centric and negative the history curriculum is before you get to university. Nothing you do before university as a history student would make you as someone who is someone racialized as black who wants to engage in those topics related to yourself or related to the African diaspora or Africa itself. Nothing's kind of pushing you towards that. And you can see that through engaging with the GCSE curriculum, A-level curriculum, but then what goes beyond that in terms of media until our new race man David Osogo came about, and Carla was getting paid by the BBC. You didn't really have anyone, and that's only from a male perspective as well. You still have pretty much nothing apart from the kind of recent rise of Olivia Otelli, and she's been more on in newspapers. But
Afua Hirsch as well.
Afua Hirsch, but in terms of academic historians and kind of and the popular depictions of history, you still have nothing. We have minimal there from a black perspective, and that's the main thing. It's also kind of the economic imperatives of doing a degree. If you're from a black, if you're racialized as black in the UK, black British, you're gonna statistically more likely to be in persistent poverty. You're more likely going to be from a lower economic background. So when you're thinking about going to university, when your parents are talking about going to university, you are thinking in the back of your head, you're thinking about how am I going to get a well-paid job? How am I going to help my parents out after you graduate? And no one thinks that there's bags of money in doing a history degree. And so law, medicine, economics, finance become more kind of in terms of what your perspective beneficial to your economic endeavors. And then obviously cultural pressures of wanting to be or being persuaded to be a doctor, a lawyer, and other things like that. But I'd say the main thing is how you experience history as a young adult and as a child is so warped against who you are, seeing yourself as depictions of only as an enslaved individual, only as as a form of as an individual who has capacity for passive resistance, and especially for black women having only heroes, which are male, only having from the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, even in the more nuanced kind of analysis with Toussaint Louverture, the lack of a kind of, regardless of all the labours of black female historians and other academics, the fact that black women don't have a popular history that they can engage with easily, they have to kind of go beyond. They have to go beyond, and it's similar for most racialized groups, unfortunately.
You did have the Harriet Tubman film, didn't you, recently?
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen it either. To be fair, I don't even know if it's a film or a series.
It's definitely a film. I think it was. Okay. I think it was not. It was nominated for something. I think it was obviously ignored by. But yeah, that does change it, and that having that female focus on a popular film is historically a good thing. I don't know. Stuart Hall talks about it, just because a film, just because a film has a black subject doesn't mean it's automatically going to be good. I haven't seen it, so I don't want to speak on it. But there is like a kind of renaissance on blackness on film from, Sorry to Bother You, which I don't think deals with the black female subject that well, but there is, not specifically history, but there are films which are engaging with blackness in nuance and engaging ways. I haven't seen Slim and Queen. Is it Slim and Queen?
Yeah,
I haven't seen
Queen and Slim.
Queen and Slim, sorry. I haven't seen that either. I'm seeing that tomorrow. But yeah, I think that film would be a big, and this is obviously where your more well versed than I am, Elias. But yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of changing that narrative. But it has to be done in a way which is not tokenistic, doesn't engage in the same tropes, doesn't just replace the white subject with a black subject, and has some nuance to it as well.
Definitely. And so you weren't deterred from pursuing history despite the statistics. So how did you find your passion in history, and why did you pursue it?
I would challenge the question, say I was deterred. I didn't do it as a GCSE. As soon as I could opt out of history, I did. When I didn't do A levels, but when I did the first term, I think it was AS's then, so I did the first year of it, and I didn't choose history then. It was probably bottom of my list. It was only when I had gone to basketball college academy and then got into university to study sports science when I realised quite quickly that that's what I didn't want to do. Then kind of dropping out, and it was really coincidence. So I was writing what was going to be my first essay for my sports science degree, and it was something it was like lawn tennis society, and I was like, what am I doing? And I just literally went on train line, went from London to Brighton, went home, and my mum was watching, as she normally always is, watching a documentary on BBC Two at like ridiculous o'clock. And so yeah, got in. I didn't really want to talk about it, so I just kind of watched what Mum was watching, and it was David Olusoga's Black and British. And then what followed that was Akala's, I think it was Roots, Reggae and Rebellion. Two amazing documentaries. And it just kind of I had this like emotion and this like drive to know more. And I was like, I wanted to do that. I was inspired by both of those individuals, even though I'm very critical of not so much of them as individuals, of their positionality and how their light may obscure other people's labour. But that was enough for me. As soon as I saw that, as soon as I went back to the university I was dropping out of, I went to the library, got every book I could on these topics. I went to the advisor, told him I wanted to drop out, got on UCAS and applied to study history, and had the good fortune of being able to go to Ghana, going to the Du Bois Museum there, which inspired me to I saw his gown, where he was the first ever African American to graduate from Harvard with a PhD, and I was like, yeah, I can see that. That's what I want. And that was how I overcame that barrier of the lack of recognition, lack of representation. But it's still a constant, kind of argument in my head. Do I belong in these spaces when I am the only male racialized as black in my year studying history, and I make up 50% of that population in terms of the black population? It's me and an amazing woman called Kofo Ajula who works in.
You're the only one.
I'm the only black male racialized as black in third year history. There are people in the year below, and I think in first year as well. But that's how bad it is at like a Russ Group university like Bristol. So I'm still having that debate, even though I've had that kind of awakening. That this is ongoing. It's a process. It hasn't happened, and I'm not settled on this.
Yeah, because and you're so used to it as well from being the only one in the classroom. Like, I imagine in Brighton and whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so. What do you think needs to change in order to get more young black kids into history?
It's a bit of a banality to just say diversify the curriculum. There's an article in the Guardian every week saying that, and I think that we all know that. It's the problem for a lot of time is who's controlling that narrative, and right now it's a Tory government, which is kind of, it seems, especially from recent news, indifferent to black existence and to the black presence in the UK. So, how do you put black history on a map when, that identity, that presence is being ultimately challenged with deportations and other things? So when you look at the curriculum, it's like, who's in power is really important. How do, activists and academics challenge this? I think the main thing is making your work accessible and engaging to demographics who are not traditionally engaged by this, or people have not tried to engage them. There's some amazing work out there which is groundbreaking, and unfortunately, it doesn't find itself in the circles it needs to. It kind of just swings around these very kind of white middle class settings, even if it engages with the black identity and black history. But also, we don't have to be so kind of essentialist and ethnically strict with these things. Black students can engage with German history, with things that have no relevance to blackness. But if you cannot see yourself inside that setting of being a participant of that discourse, then regardless of what you're studying, you're not going to think you're a part of it. And that's like I said, it's a process. I've had the experience of being kind of feeling as if I belong, but it's constantly being undermined by my existence at Ross Group University, by going to a seminar and lectures and conferences, and it being so unrepresentative. So it's a kind of it has to be a holistic approach. We can't just have all our focus on the kind of pedagogy and kind of direct kind of ramifications of curriculum. We have to go beyond that, but how that actually looks, I think, is different for every individual.
Mm. You've mentioned the term racialized as black a few times. How do you racialize yourself?
I think my sense of race comes from having had the experience of traveling a bit. My grandmother's from Jamaica, my grandfather's from Ghana, my dad's English. My sister lives in Barbados. I have family in Montreal. I have family in New York. I've traveled around the Black Atlantic as much as my finite economic situation allows me to. And I have been racialized something different everywhere I've gone. When I'm in England, depending on the community and the place I'm in, I'm either mixed or black. When I was in the Caribbean, I was just black. When I was in Ghana, I was Bruni, which I found out later basically meant white. And then when I was in New York, I was African American until I opened my mouth, and then I became black. So if I kind of identified myself on the oppositional gaze, then I would have been a constant, perpetual confusion, as I think a lot of people are. I don't like the term mixed race because I see it as racial essentialism to the highest order. It's not only saying that there are such things as a black race and a white race. It's saying that these things are so incompatible that when they eventually, and from this perspective, I guess, unfortunately mix, that they create something mongrel-like. It's a ridiculous, archaic term rooted in colonization and slavery, and I think that it's just about time it's kind of dropped, unless it's in quotation marks. That does not mean that we have to kind of get rid of this idea of experience being different. You have to recognize when you are mixed, quote unquote, the privilege that comes with that, i.e. the main one being lighter skin. And so you have to be able to, in this, new ethnicities, Stuart Hall idea, you have to recognize colorism and societal hierarchies. However, the term mixed race, I think, speaks to an idea of racial purity, which I think anyone in the 21st century, anyone who's anti-racist should feel uncomfortable with. And also, it's unclear what it really means. Is it about heritage, parentage, pigmentation? Is it all of those things combined? If it's about parentage, if you are dark-skinned but adopted, from two black parents and adopted by a white family, you don't become mixed race. If you're in vice versa and all these other situations, if you go to the Caribbean, you will find people who have two black parents but are incredibly light-skinned because of the history of history of Jamaica and other Caribbean countries.
Slavery,
So it's really, it doesn't make sense to call yourself mixed race. You'd have to really believe in this idea of racial purity. And there's a reason why when we talk about, if you read about race, it's either italicized or in quotes. It's not a real thing. It's a social construct. And I think that the problem I have is with the biological determinism and kind of essentialism rooted in a term like mixed race. To say you're racialized as mixed race, that's fine. Or say you're racialized as black, but it's a term put on blackness to create a hierarchy within those communities, especially in places like Haiti and you know, across the Caribbean. It was a means of creating an other and creating the lowest of the low. But as I said, again, you need to, if you are from mixed parentage, you do need to acknowledge the privilege and the difference of that experience. But it doesn't mean you're biologically, you know, different in any real way. It's skin deep.
It's really interesting, this topic, and it interests me a lot. You mentioned earlier that, like, you know, you'd been to Ghana, and I've been to Ghana as well, to see my dad's side of the family. And I remember being out there and very much feeling white, you know. I mean, I've been to Africa a couple of times, and actually South Africa's different because they've got a whole coloured population. But, you know, you definitely realise, you know, it's very explicit that you are stand out.
And it makes you realise how contextual it is. Like, being mixed-raced in England is so contextual to the kind of imperatives of English racism and English class, race, gender, and kind of national structures. These things exist within the context of which they're in. So it's completely, I would say, if you perceive yourself, and you're not even in a global perspective, but if you can, you know, go beyond the dominant discourse as, I think, an anti-racist, or at least someone who is like against, you know, the problems of race in the 21st century should do, you can see this is not, it's contextual. It doesn't mean anything, and unfortunately, a lot of anti-racism buys into this trope. And Paul Gilroy talks about this in There Ain't No Black in Union Jack. Especially liberal anti-racism can fall victim to buying into the same concepts of race, of, you know, white supremacists, of the racists. And if you have this essentialist notion, which you can find in all spheres, especially like early stages of Pan-Africanism, and you have like Marcus Garvey saying that Du Bois is, you know, half white in blood as well as thought and stuff like that. And then you have really kind of negative things from even Du Bois' perspective, talking about how, you know, Africans need to learn English. That's another critique of Pan-Africanism. But it's so easy to buy into these tropes. And if your anti-racism is rooted in racial essentialism, you are philosophically coupled with people who you should be distant with. You should be as far away as possible from people who think that there is a biological reality about someone's skin color, in terms of it purporting to. But like,
do you think
race.
it's often as deep as that? Because I think you know, our knowledge of race and colonialism is, you know, I do believe there's levels to it, and we're lucky enough to have done research and studied this and understand the complexities of it. But I can't hold too much malice against people who, just because of their conditioning, refer to people as black and white because that's kind of all they know. And they might not necessarily see it as like biological essentialism. It's often it's just a term to describe someone's someone's appearance. So it's like, you know, your hair color, you know, it's like you're going to say, well, that's a redhead, but really it's actually an orange color. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so I do wonder how much of it we should sort of condemn people who, you know, play into the biological essentialism, or just there just needs to be kind of more education.
Well, yeah, it's when. Like, I don't think anyone has a problem who makes this analysis. Anyone has a problem with it. We want to describe an experience. That's why blackness is an experience. Whiteness is an identity, and whiteness is exactly the same. The only problem with the popular discourse around black and white is that it treats blackness as the other, and as the kind of and this is true for any racialized group. In the popular discourse, even though it may just be kind of descriptive, it's still, and even in black communities, and this is what Fanon talks about in White Skin, Black Masks, Black Skin, White Masks, the internalization of the idea of otherness. Like, you've othered yourself by buying into kind of colonial concepts of race. So by perceiving talking about people as black and then not actually referring to people as white in a specific way, which undermines that identity and the reality of that identity, is still problematic, because you can treat yourself as the other very easily. But also in terms of education, I don't think it's the role of people who have a degree in sociology or history to go and tell other people what they should think. It's more about having an approach to anti-racism and to race which doesn't buy into the concepts that we are directly opposing. All of the negative ramifications of previous centuries in terms of race rely upon there being this idea of race, and that people are separated in very specific in very specific ways, and that is rooted in inferiority.
And do you think mixed race people in that sense perhaps help break it all up, and undermine the whole stupidity of the constructs of race in any way?
I don't think we're the answer. No, I don't think it's I'm not saying what you're saying, but I don't think it's light skins to the rescue. I think that the what undermines race is it's just I mean, if you look at eugenics and early white supremacy, it just doesn't make sense. They relied on silly biblical ideas about sons of Ham and stuff like that. It never makes sense. Yeah. We don't really need. I mean, maybe tangible examples. But like, if you look at like your writings of,
I think what I more mean in the sense that we're evidence that race isn't a thing, because if black and white people were different races, they wouldn't be able to like breed necessarily, or and it's like the fact that there is analysis exist in that space is just quite interesting. And I also would like to ask you as well, if not mixed race, how would you prefer to be referred as?
I think to answer the second part, the problem is the necessity to answer that question, if that makes sense.
Brilliant answer.
The fact that I need to be racialized for you to kind of get a grasp of who I am. That's the problem. I mean, I'm not saying that's a societal thing.
Are you at all proud of being of mixed heritage?
I don't find pride in many things I don't have control over. I'm proud of the fact that my mum was a black woman in the 70s and 80s and put up with the stuff that she did, and she resisted, and the stuff that she does now and continues that resistance. I'm proud of my grandmother for making that courageous step to leave the Caribbean, leave the Caribbean for what she thought was a better life for her children. I'm proud of my dad's working class roots. I'm proud of these things, but I'm not proud that I don't find pride in the fact that I have parents who this loving versus Virginia narrative where they kind of broke the taboo. Maybe some people. What I find pride in is there's a resistance of the individuals in my family. I'm very proud of being black. I'm very proud of the historical connotations of my identity. Like, very proud of those things. But I don't want to engage in this kind of essentialist trope where everything stems from flawed biology.
Absolutely, I think that's a great answer. I'm getting a headache with all this race talk. So let's lighten the subject matter a little bit. Though I think it just quickly, very interesting as well to acknowledge that colorism and the privilege, and Paul Gilroy's light skin, Malcolm X was light skin, a lot of, and I also acknowledge that I think that in the work that I've done and stuff, I feel like I probably am able to get away with it easier than if I was dark skinned.
100%. And just on that note, I especially in the work I've done in Bristol, I've found it's quite clearly I've becoming the acceptable face of anti-racism in a lot of circles, and my lightness is central to that. How white people perceive me is central to that. So I do think that you can't say, there's no such thing as mixed race, and then treat me as if I'm my experience is exactly the same. That's just as not just it's probably equally as erroneous. But if you look at cultural critics and there is in terms of the Caribbean and Caribbean philosophy, there's still ways of acknowledging hierarchies without buying into the same biological fact. But this doesn't mean, I hope this doesn't come across as don't call anyone black, don't call anyone white. You know, a great academic, Dr. Nathaniel Allen Tobias Coleman, talks about he doesn't talk about anyone being black or white. He talks about people being racialized as black, racialized as white, because there is very little in terms of scientific reality in these identities. But again, you have to recognize, and it's not just color, it's all intersections. You have to realize when it comes to your identity, the interplay of these other structures and class, gender, sexuality, age. So it's really, I think it does, undermining the idea of a mixed race identity makes one's identity more holistic and makes makes anti-racism more holistic just by nature of undermining a flaw in anti-racism.
Fun fact as well: humans, Homo sapiens as a species, are a mixture of species. Apparently, Neanderthals and sapiens. So we're hybridity is the very nature of our existence, despite what color your skin is.
But and just so we are, like, in terms of DNA, when everyone is like 96.6% the same in terms of our DNA makeup. There's just as much biodiversity in Africa as there is outside of Africa. We cling on to, and people have done this for economic imperatives and power dynamics, that we cling on to small details, i.e. skin color, when it becomes necessary. But then if you look at black identity, that has become a necessity because of the resistance to white supremacy. So you don't want to undermine black identity. You just want to within that, you don't want to have the same tropes. So there can still be a black identity while undermining. This is like the core fundamentals of Paul Gilroy's and Stuart Hall's
anti-racism. Coming back.
Sorry. Okay, I'll finish there.
Right, Meghan Markle, go.
Do you want me to just sound off on?
Sound off, mate.
I haven't engaged in that topic too much. I think that
neither have I.
What I think is there's positives. The fact that the experience of a black woman
is she a black woman?
In terms, her father's African American.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, my bad.
Sorry, racialized as black woman. You got me.
There you go.
The experience of a racialized person is becoming a big part of popular discourse. I think that is undoubtedly a good thing. My concern is that we only have this concern when they are, of quote unquote importance. I don't see the same energy. There was an awful statistic about black women's rates of death in pregnancy that came out last year. I did not see the same energy. And if the
refugees drowning in
exactly, and it's like, so you don't want pro-black discourse to be dominated by tabloids, but the experience of a racialized individual in those tabloids should be part of our discourse. But if it becomes to dominate, and then black women in Britain whose experience is awful because of other factors get silenced because of that, that's a negative. So you really want to be able to have a engaging. You have to want to engage with Meghan Markle's experience whilst not silencing the experience of quote unquote everyday black women. So I think it's spoken to some of the positives that we are challenging. Like the tabloid depictions of a racialized person, of a black woman, but then it speaks to some of our problems in the fact that we are silencing other narratives.
And you're quite sort of well read and knowledgeable about gender, and you're quite critical of male identity. Where does that all come from?
I think, like everyone, I had the benefit of reading. Not everyone, but you had the benefit of reading bell hooks, which intervened when I first. It was a good intervention when I was reading very, masculine depictions of Black history, and reading female African American women's kind of critique of Black history and Black culture, in terms of like Hazel Carby's Race Men was so important in terms of how I understood and understand now Black discourse, but also just having a mother who's Black, two Black sisters who their experience, how it differed from mine, shaped me, shaped my perspective. But yeah, in terms of in an academic sense, it came from the philosophies and academic interventions of Black women, and it's been central to my academic endeavors. When you can't really tell, the academy has kind of understood this now. You can't just tell a history or the history of anything without any kind of analysis of how that experience differed for in terms of gender. So that's a gender. So that's a big part of it as well.
Do you ever just get like exhausted about critically thinking about all of these things from time to time? Like me.
I don't know. I guess so. But in terms of like using masculinity as an example, my critique of masculinity is central to how I'm growing as a person. When I notice things that I'm doing and how they're rooted in I know it's just a bit of a buzzword now, but rooted in toxic traits that are related to masculinity. I'm acknowledging that. So there's not a clear line between my academic endeavors and my quest to be a better person. But in terms of masculinity, I want to know what I want to engage with these critiques as often as I can to firstly help myself and then help others.
And it shouldn't always be depressing, right?
No, I don't. The fact that you can be a better person or that you can change your concept of manhood to help you and yourself and others I don't see that as a negative at all. I think it's unlearning what was drilled into us, and doesn't exonerate men at all. But what was drilled into us, I don't think it's difficult, but it's necessary and it can be enjoyable. As I think I've shown when we've done our reading groups before and critically or engage with Black feminism and the response, and when we talk about these things, it can be enjoyable and it should be enjoyable, really. And there are you have to unlearn, and that can be a difficult process. But I don't get tired of it. No,
that's good. I don't really, but sometimes I feel like I do.
Do I exhaust you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're exhausting me, Teo. So what do you make of the kind of virtue signalling generation we're in, identity politics and the oppression Olympics, and how they are perhaps poisoning some of this important discourse?
Can I challenge the question again?
Please.
What is it? It's just like it's a difficult one because the whole narrative of people being so sensitive and 10 years, like when I watched not long ago, it was an older interview, but I think it was Jay from Inbetweeners, and he was talking about you couldn't do Inbetweeners nowadays, and it's just like, well, you probably could, and I think the fact that maybe some things in Inbetweeners wouldn't be as acceptable is not to do with everyone's so sensitive. It's probably to do with the democratization of the national voice, as in people were getting take it like comedy. People were getting quote unquote offended. I think that word doesn't really mean what it used to, because of the root in that question you asked. But people were getting offended by these things a long, long time ago. But now the people who were offended and are still offended, they now have a voice. And I don't want to have this like kind of Whiggish interpretation of British history, but social media and these things have given people on Twitter are just as relevant as the news reporter now. So yeah, there is a I think what we're dealing with is a rise in the voice of marginalized communities, and if that means that things are changing, it's probably for the good. There are obviously, I think there's certain elements of, it's called, I don't like it, but cancel culture, and the inability to give people a second chance. And you can argue the efficacy of second chances in certain contexts. But there's definitely certain things that need to be adapted. But I think people going after the Me Too movement and stuff like that, it's really rooted in a struggle for power. And I think people who have been on top are now realizing, things are changing. Like, and then the whole thing, I can't even hug women anymore. That's like related to Me Too. But it really doesn't mean anything what they're saying. What they're saying is, I liked things how they were when I could do whatever I wanted and not be made accountable for it. And you see that in all of these separate discourses. So I challenge the question, but I do think there is some small merit to it, and so especially in virtue signaling and how people can make themselves feel better by caring about issues which they don't really care about, especially and you see this in questions like, is it racist? And am I racist if I say this? Am I sexist if I say this? The concern is the label attached to you, not the experience of that individual or that group or that community. So there's definitely some value in critiquing a new perspective on culture and politics.
Brilliantly answered, mate. Lastly, I want to actually chat to you a little bit about veganism, because I know, not that we're snowflakes or anything, but I know that it's just the Bristol effect.
Yeah,
I know that you were vegan for a couple of years, and now you have decided to pack it in.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Gone to the dark side.
I think I was 19, and I'd stopped eating meat, and I was just eating dairy. And then I think by the time I turned 20, I was vegan until I was 23, basically. So about 3 years. It was the decision to go back to eating fish and dairy was kind of rooted in the fact that I realized I was gluten intolerant, and I just kind of accepted a lower standard of living. I was like, you eat a sandwich and you feel awful for a day. That's just normal, apparently. But so I accepted that, and I was kind of done with that. And then when I realized, like, when I went gluten free and vegan, I just couldn't do it. I was not getting enough calories. It is doable, but if you have a budget that's much bigger than mine, and maybe a personal chef or something like that, which I didn't. So that was a problem. But also that the main thing was that I realized that I was just accepting things being okay as like the new norm. You got like a vegan pizza and you're like, oh, this isn't awful. And then you'd be happy about that. And so I was kind of, especially with stuff like the desserts, you'd have like a fake vegan cake, and it would taste, it would be barely edible, and you were happy about that. I was like, that's not a way to live.
You can get some good vegan cakes,
but you know what I mean? Like, there's so many things where you would eat them and you'd be like, oh, this is not that bad, and that was your new norm. The new norm was, decent food being like, oh, this is great. I'm going to go out and spend 15 quid on like a vegan burger, which nearly tastes like it's just, to me, I was like, I could die at any moment. I don't want my last meal to be like some crappy vegan. So I was.
What got you into it though? Environment, health, morality.
I think it was all of the above. To be honest, there was no primary driving force. I think it was.
And how do you now feel that you're not? Because clearly it can't be the passion for it. Is it the passion for it that's like dissipated, or is it that you? Do you know what I mean? Because it's not. I can't imagine you now care less about the environment.
No. This is the thing. I'm actually more. I think I don't want to undermine veganism. I don't want to upset you snowflake, but right. I don't want to undermine veganism. But I think I'm more environmentally friendly than I was. So I avoid soya. I try to avoid almond milk now, and I definitely don't drink cow's milk. I try to go for oat milk and better alternatives like rice milk, even though that's not the best tasting things, but coconut milk. I try to avoid the negative things. I think I use I shop more ethically as much as one can when one because the only dairy I have is mozzarella and halloumi, and what? That's the word.
Yeah.
And then I have fish on occasion, but it's all line caught and stuff like that. So I'm as ethically conscious as one can be if one's a pescatarian. but what fueled it, I think, originally, to answer your first question, was the reason I wasn't a vegan was because I remember arguing with my sister, who was a vegan at this point, saying something, well, if I change, no real difference going to make. There's still going to be like thousands of cows or millions of cows slaughtered and whatever. And she said if you had that philosophy for everything, you'd never do anything. And so, which is quite a simple thing, but my sister kind of made that clear to me in relation to food. So, yeah.
Nice. Cool, man. Well, I hope you come back to the
nice
force,
note to end on. Yeah.
to the light side of the force. Yeah, to be fair, I started doing it for all of the above, but to be fair, now it's actually just routine. Like sometimes I don't, and I'm a lazy one as well, so I'm not like that environment. I don't always recycle. I'm not always like.
Are you sure you want to admit this on a?
I don't give a shit. Yeah, no, but it's interesting. Like, for me, it's actually it came down to, and my brother is the same. Actually, it's not an environmental thing. It's not even a health thing. It's actually, I'd say for me, probably a moral thing, and actually like a. Not a squeamish thing, but I'm a bit like funny. Like when I see a cow being fisted, and like I don't really want to drink that like stuff. Like
you don't want to drink cow pus.
I'm not really into that. Like, I'm actually a bit like icky about that.
I do think there might. I agree. And there might be a point where
I can't shut off from that.
Yeah.
Some people can.
And
like
there was definitely, in terms of my other philosophies in life, there was some inconsistencies about me having. And I know that I have my mozzarella and my halloumi. But I do have the
everything, moderation is important.
And that's the thing. That's everything. I thought I could. Having that strict label of a vegan was really not doing much for me, in the sense that I was like, I can be ethical and I can engage occasionally. Have these things, but I'm still like pro veganism from the sidelines. Like I'm not eating meat anytime soon, unless you consider, fish to be encompassed in that category. But for me. I think vegetarianism and pescatarianism with an ethical focus is still making me morally consistent and still, benefiting what I try to benefit in the first place.
Definitely, man. No, man,
I'm a good person.
You're a good person,
that's what I'm saying.
You're a good person, mate. But yeah, thank you. Is there anything else you want to just like plug quickly or say things you've got coming up? I know you got the BBC thing.
Yeah, I mean, watch out for. It's a project with the BBC. It'll be a short video. Going to be kind of talking about my experience, a lot of what you heard already. Looking at why people aren't studying history, black students aren't studying history, why they are, having like a candid conversation with some other black students studying history. Going to talk to Olivia Otelli, who's an amazing historian who you should look out for. Look at her work if you're interested in histories of slavery, histories of colonial Africa. But yeah, I'm happy to come back again and talk more thoroughly about race and
hip hop. We didn't even talk about music.
I know, yeah, we know. We need to get a whole thing about hip hop. I think that as many people I've annoyed about my analysis around race, even more would be annoyed about my analysis about hip hop. So get the views up.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Teo.
Cool. Thank you.
You're on Instagram, Kane Teo.
Yeah, it's a very personal account, but if you want to follow that, go ahead.
Follow 1020 at 1020.live, and the social media is 1020_radio. And cool. Mandem Hood is at Mandem Hood.
Of course.
Thank you very much for listening, folks.